don't want the QR code for the attendance in it.
This meeting is being recorded.
We wanted the attendance should be in the recording. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, speaking of the attendance, please use the QR code or the link that Noemi, I believe, is going to post in the chat for us. It really helps to know how many people attended. So please do this. I'll leave it on the screen for another minute. And it will be at the end. So 3, 2, 1. Also, a plug for the Smart Health. Great program. Get your points if you're doing it. And then the last announcement before we begin is one of your last couple weeks left to submit your recommendations for the PNW pit stop recommendation list. We're compiling various delicacies around the region, so please participate in that if you want. All right, so what is in a name? Community by many other names. This quote, this title is a slightly tweaked quote from Romeo and Juliet, a Shakespeare play, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about what that quote is used for in that play, but it kind of is a fun connection to the whole thesis of this presentation, similar to the map that you see here, which might look a little different from the maps that you see typically, like on Google Maps, that uses the Mercator projection of the 3D globe to a 2D surface. The Mercator that we're used to seeing has less distortion or no distortion up in north and south, but much more distortion east and west than this Gall-Peters map that you see here. The problem with the Mercator one that we're used to seeing is that it shows Greenland and Africa to be about the same size, but in reality, Africa is 4 Gall-Peters, while each, instead of just one, they're going to be more accurate to how they actually take up space in our world. I show this just to point out how anytime we take something whole and complicated and real and try to flatten it into a nice, simple model that we can use, it's not that doing that is wrong, but we just have to keep in mind that it's incomplete. It's never going to be a perfect projection of the world into a 2D rectangle. And similarly, our community is so big and diverse and complicated that these terms, Latino and Hispanic, don't quite cover everything or leave some things out. So let's look at what the Oxford English Dictionary says Latino and Hispanic mean. Latino is a person who comes from Latin America or whose family came from there. Hispanic is of or connected with Spain or Spanish-speaking countries, especially those of Latin America. Now, both of these having a Latin America reference, to me, shows the hand of who created these terms for our community. These words are not words that were invented by us to describe ourselves. They are actually racializing efforts by the United States government, specifically the Census, so that they could count and categorize us simply. An assistant professor in the Department of Hispanic Languages and Literature at Stony Brook University told Teen Vogue in October of 2018, quote, "The history of Hispanic is intimately tied to the US government, and the way that the government attempted to identify different groups of people, particularly in relationship to the US Census. Between 1930 and 1960, the United States Census had exactly one option for our community on it, which was just Mexican. Keep in mind, Puerto Rico was a territory as far back as 1898. But then again, I don't know if Pacific Islander was on there for Guam at this point either. In 1970, they tried a new option, the Census Bureau. They had either no, none of these, or Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Central or South American, other Spanish. The problem with that category was that people with no cultural or ethnic connections to the group that they were trying to categorize, but who lived in South or Central United States checked this box. So after that fiasco of misunderstanding, there was the 1975 Committee on Racial and Ethnic Definitions. This diverse handful of federal employees debated Latino, Hispanic, colored, and more. One committee member recalled to the Post in 2003, quote, "There was never any consensus in that group to the very end. We came up with an agreement, but there were some bad feelings. I know 2 people who didn't speak for up to a year after it was over." So as you can tell, this has been a difficult thing to land on a single word for us all along. The result of that committee was the 1980 census, which was the first time the word Hispanic was used on a census form. There were further options for Mexicans, Mexican Americans, Chicanos, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, and other, but still not fully identifying all the countries south of Mexico. It's fun to note, though, in this 1980 census, terms Central and South were avoided to not confuse people of that part of this country. So let's move back to what is Latin America. But I'm not going to get into the geographic bounds, which if you were in the September 22nd Lunch and Learn, you will have remember that those geographic bounds of what is Latin America are up for debate in themselves. Instead, we're going to talk about demographics. And specifically Asian presence in our hemisphere. The 21st century census data, I'm not sure if it was the 2000 or the 2010 one, my source wasn't clear, but according to recent census data, 3% of Asian people living in the United States identify as Latin or Hispanic or one of the something in this community. And 35% of that 3% said that they were Filipino. Between the 1600s and the early 1800s, there was significant Filipino migration to the Spanish America. That was the first known time that people from the Asian multiple continent, anyway, that region of the world came to the American hemisphere. These were sailors, soldiers, prisoners, or enslaved people by the conquistadores. In the by the mid 1800s, large scale, mostly Chinese and Japanese migration was coming to this hemisphere, mostly to Cuba, Peru, Mexico, and Brazil. A lot of these were indentured servants, meaning that it's not quite slavery. You have like a time limit to it, but it's not great working conditions either. So in Cuba, because these Chinese coolies were neither black nor white and neither slave nor free, they helped to break down the racialist ideology of Cuba's plantation system. And there's also a history of Chinese and or Asian indentured servants working with the Black enslaved communities of Brazil and Peru as well, in critiquing that racial caste structure. Between 1908 and 1961, the Japanese immigration to Brazil was the largest and longest continuous flow of people from Asia to Latin America. And then by the late 1970s, Brazil had the largest Japanese community outside of Japan. When I was in Argentina for 2 months, I found a better source than myself. A Latin American studies professor who was raised both in Seoul, Korea, South Korea, and Buenos Aires, Argentina, shared their perspective. Since they're of Asian origin, often students of hers, Dr. Jun Young Veronica Kim, her students would often come in and assume that she was not a native Spanish speaker based on the way that she looked. Most jumped to the conclusion that she was not from Latin America and had no connections there. But when she starts to speak to them in English with a porteño accent, that mark of a resident of Buenos Aires, their bewilderment at her place as that professor was only amplified. She said, because of the way academics bound off area or define ethnicity, my students are unable to see the relationality. I always argue that these unknown stories are important, but in order to actually get a full perspective of what is going on now, you need to understand what went on then. The past is always present, and the present is always the past. So now that we've looked into Asian representation in, or demographic presence in the American hemisphere, Noemi is going to talk about Jewish presence in this region.
Thank you, Sedona. Also, I put a link in the chat to Young Veronica Kim's information. I went to grad school with her, so I've known her for 30 years. Of course, you know, we were both babies. We were babies when we met because we're both quinceañeras, of course. So anyway, and if you ever want to reach out to talk about Asian communities, anybody here in this Lunch and Learn, she's a very accessible, very talented, very busy person, but she loves to talk to people about the importance of Asian communities. And yeah, indeed, when people meet her, they don't think she's going to be more Argentina than, you know, Victor Gardel or somebody like that. Anyway, thank you. So those of you who know me know that my father is a Sephardic Jew. Most people who are Jewish in the world are Ashkenaz Jews, but there are some of us that are Sephardic. We're only a small minority, but I'm going to talk to you about Jews in Latin America. And first, I'm going to butcher one of my father's native languages. Sadly, you know, I am not a Ladino speaker. Ladino is the language of Sephardic Jews, also known as Judeo-Espanol. So I'm also going to put that in the chat. Which, and again, I'm going to butcher this. It's Añada Buena, Dulce y Alegre, which means Happy New Year. May your new year be sweet, because we love sweet food, and it may be happy. Rosh Hashanah was last week. Yom Kippur was a couple of days ago. And, you know, Happy New Year for all of you. Even if you don't celebrate the Jewish New Year, still a happy, sweet, and happy New Year. So there is estimated about, you know, and some of these numbers are always all over the place, anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million. And again, that's a huge range of Jewish people in Latin America. Most of these Jewish folks immigrated in the 19th century from Eastern Europe and in the 20th century, both before and after World War II. Most Jewish folks in Latin America live in urban centers. The largest communities in Latin America are Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and then as you can see, there are some communities as well in Chile. My father is from Nicaragua, but Nicaragua had such a small community. The rabbi would come every other weekend from Costa Rica. So the rabbi would do, services in Costa Rica one week, Nicaragua the other week, but he lived in Nicaragua, in Costa Rica. So you had to book him in advance if you wanted to talk to him. As I've mentioned, most of the folks are Eastern European immigrants to Latin America, but a small percentile, about 15% or so, are, like my father and myself, Sephardic Jews who speak Ladino and Spanish. And of course, you also have Jews from other parts, including the Middle East, and people who are Jewish from the Middle East are known as Mizrahi Jews, but there are other Jewish groups. And if you want to know a little bit more about Ladino, that's the language of Jews. I'm just going to put a little quote here for all of you from my Jewish learning. It has some important Ladino expressions. If you speak Spanish or Portuguese, you will understand a lot, but the spelling, of course, will be different. So back to Sedona.
Thank you. Oops, I skipped the slide there. So now let's start talking about what our community name could be. If I'm not even going to pretend we can come up with a single solitary one. Let's look at what some people call themselves in their specific type of Latino or Hispanic identity. So I'm going to first read this quote by an incredible author, Sandra Cisneros. In 1992, she told the New York Times, to say Latino is to say you come to my culture in a manner of respect. To say Hispanic means you're so colonized, you don't even know for yourself or someone who named you never bothered to ask what you call yourself. Now, and another point of Sandra's background and identity is that she, even more than Latino, identifies as a Chicana person, a Chicana woman. And I entirely respect and hold space for her position and opinion. She endured much more combative history than I have had the luxury and privilege of not having to worry about yet. And I don't personally share this reaction to Hispanic. It's definitely not my preference for myself of how I refer to myself and my identity, but if someone calls me that, I don't feel offense in this same way that Sandra did or does. And on top of that, I also find Latino to be too limited as well, which I only had reinforced when I had the luxury or the privilege of interviewing Manny Santiago, one of our LLN members, but also the Washington State LGBTQ Commission Executive Director. He prefers Latin to Latino or Latine, which is my preference, Latine. But his partner has an indigenous Mayan Yucatecan lineage, and Manny's partner's only Spanish lineage was expelled as the Muslim Moors. And so when someone calls him Hispanic or even Latino, that both of those don't feel appropriate to him, because the Spanish didn't really appreciate his lineage in either way, in either sense. So, and the language that he was raised speaking is not a Latin or Latino language, as it is indigenous to this hemisphere. So Manny's personal preference for Latine and his partner's rejection of any form of that are great examples of how any of these terms are tools and they're not rules. If it's a tool that helps you, pick it up and use it. But if it doesn't help you, leave it for someone else. And if it doesn't suit you, that doesn't mean it doesn't suit someone else. So here I've got a clip of a wonderful little comic. I recommend that you seek it out. You can search Terry Bloss, and he has a couple of great comics about our community's identity and names. So this excerpt of this comic says, personally, I like using the "e." It makes amigos, amigues. So in conclusion, amigues, let me say I would never tell anyone how to define themselves. Use whatever you like to be more inclusive. But I think I will use "e," which means that for me, Latinx just might become Latine. I love this clip of it because that "just might become" allows for his changing his mind later, and that's okay. Terry also said, I welcome constructive criticism, but what I find strange is people who are upset that I didn't include some alternative for the X in French. I don't speak French. I'm not from France, which is very valid. Terry does not need to come up with the answer for French-speaking Latine people. But my point is there are Latine French-speaking countries and people. And so ideally, we would have something that would be able to be said in every language our community speaks, but that just is probably not going to be. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of getting something done. So here are some more terms that some in our community identify with. And these are just going to even more prove that we just aren't going to be able to come up with one universal name without whitewashing the colonial caste distinctions that have been around for centuries. So some people identify with Chicano, residents of the US from Mexico, historically rooted in the 1960s political organizing. And Sandra identifies with this movement because she was an active member of this organization. I, however, don't feel comfortable using this term to describe myself since I have the luxury of not having had to go through that movement with my grandfather's generation. Some more words are one that I had never heard before that someone had told Yes Magazine they use is Mazewali or Mazewayi or some other pronunciation, I'm sorry, which is a Nawa word for an indigenous person. And this one I've made sure to include because it's the only one I could find for people of our community with very limited or complicated ties to, or just not wanting to be tied with that Latino colonizing background. More words are Californios, which are people from California, and Boricuas, which are people from Puerto Rico. And then Tejanos is Texas residents with Mexican ancestry, particularly those whose ancestors were there when it was a Mexican state. And I want to add, before it was a Mexican state as well. Oh, and one other thing for Chicanos that's ties back to a prior discussion of this presentation is that we should not celebrate the Chicano movement without also celebrating the fact that Filipino and other Asian farm workers were absolutely participants in that activism and those fights for justice. So two words that are not included on this slide are mestizo, which means a person, or it's the race born of the mixing of Euro, Afro, Indigeno lineages. I did not include this word because it's often only used when you want to deny the racism and colorism of Latinidad to an Afro or Indigenous Latino. And then the other word I did not include rhymes with roboto and also starts with an M, and that word has so much dehumanizing history that I don't feel comfortable to even say it. So before we leave this topic of what do we call ourselves, I wanted to just also point out that the white folks don't have it any easier as far as if their name truly matches what their people descended from and are connected to culturally. Most of the Caucasus region, the country of Georgia and Armenia, we don't think of as white people. And also the Anglo-Saxons ruled over the UK for about 500 years until 1066, when the Normans invaded and dominated the culture of that, the British Isles from then on. So anyone saying that they're an Anglo-Saxon descendant isn't really basing that in any actual history. That makes sense. The first time this hemisphere was called America was in 1507. A German map maker produced a 12-panel world map, and the left-hand picture is one of those 12. He chose to use the word America for this new world landmass in honor of Amerigo Vespucci, who in his 1501 to 1502 voyage recognized that this land was not the Indies, actually. And in honor of that recognition by Vespucci, that map maker named this land America. The right-hand picture is from September of 2021 in New Mexico. These are the White Sands in the White Sands National Park. These footprints had seeds stuck in them that have been dated to 23,000 years ago, meaning, they found 61 tracks by up to 16 people, most of them teens and children. This find is more than doubles the oldest evidence of people in the American hemisphere. Next slide. What we used to know as the oldest known evidence of human presence in this hemisphere were the Clovis Points, which are the bottom right picture. These sometimes uses arrow or spearheads. These sharp rocks are actually very hard to make. You're just using one rock to chip off other parts of another rock into these very delicately precise tools. So that suggests that the society that was making Clovis Points was pretty advanced. In my 8th grade, we tried to make some of these points with obsidian, which is a very easy rock to use, and it was definitely a challenge. So that's in the years ago bar, the Clovis Points is the blue, the footprints are the purple, but then recently archaeologists have found a new site that just blows that timeline out of the water. In February, which is funny because this site was discovered in 1992, but it's been 30 years of figuring out when this happened in time. So the Cerruti Mastodon site in archaeology in February of 2017, the San Diego Natural History Museum published in the Nature Scientific Journal the Cerruti Macedon site findings from that 1992 discovery. They found 5 large stones that were apparently used as a hammer and an anvil, and then in the vicinity of a totally taken apart mammoth skeleton. The picture on the left-hand side is a diagram of the scientists having recreated one of the tusks had those breakage examples, breakage pieces. And in nature, it's common for bones to break by twisting, but clearly this was not broken by twisting. Something hit it, something broke it. And so we think that these were people that did this, not only because of using that rock as a hammering tool, which also is a much more primitive way of getting in, breaking apart that bone, that use of rock is much more ancient technology wise than the Clovis Points. So it makes sense that it would be an older society that was breaking this mammoth tusk than was making the Clovis Points. This is out of order. The other thing that was interesting of this site that really showed it was not a natural or an animal affair was this other mammoth tusk that was positioned straight up and down in layers of undisturbed soil. So someone stuck it in there. It's not like the river could come and drop it just like that in this perfectly otherwise happy to stay put soil. So this little tangent into archaeology, I included to say that 130,000 years ago, which is when the Macedon site is dated to, was so old that we can't even say it was humans, because our best guess at this point is that humans left Africa in 120,000 years ago. So the fact that this mammoth had signs of human activity in San Diego 130,000 years ago suggests that the people that were breaking this mammoth bone might have not even been Homo sapiens. They might have been one of our other cousin human species, one of the other hominin species that have since gone extinct. This isn't to say that the indigenous people of Turtle Island of this hemisphere aren't right in saying that their people have been here since time immemorial. It just is another example of how whenever you take something complicated and real and try to flatten it into a nice, simple rectangle model, things are going to get lost. So the same way that we don't even know what if it was our kind of human, it's hard to say. How do I put it? Sorry, I lost where I was going with that. To wrap up, and before I open it up for comments, one last point I wanted to make was we often think of our ancient ancestors as primitive, but really all of our evidence is that the human experience, the human thoughts, wants, feelings has really not changed in the entire course of Homo sapien. The world is very different now than several thousand years ago, but what tools we had and what wants and needs we had haven't really changed all that much. We think of Neanderthals as these dumb brutes, but we've found sites where Neanderthals were painstakingly buried with flowers decorating their grave site. So clearly things are more complicated than just that story we're often told. And while we try to come up with like one word that's gonna define our whole Latino identity or community, that splitting of hairs doesn't always make sense at such a higher level than the ones that we're often living and wondering and curious about in our day-to-day life, if that makes sense. So if you want to share any thoughts or opinions or any questions, I'm opening up. Or Noemi, did you want to share anything from the chat before we open up for people to raise their hand?
There's been a lot of comments in the chat about people sharing their histories, particularly people who have biracial, bicultural identities and, not feeling necessarily connected to the community, but wanting to do that. I'm not going to read those because people were not necessarily told those were going to be out loud. But from now on, if people want to put things in the chat, I can do a little summary. But of course, you're also welcomed and very much encouraged to raise your hand and speak out loud if you wish.
And while you guys are raising your hands or typing, this last image on the screen here is getting that 3D globe into a 2D rectangle with as little distortion as possible. And then you can't make it be a rectangle, so you've got the blank negative space behind it.
So we've had a couple of people saying thank you. They've learned a lot. So, nothing yet substantive. So I'm just waiting for that. But also, again, people are encouraged to raise their hand and share orally if you feel comfortable. Or also ask questions. You don't have to, you can also ask questions from all of us. Ooh, Steve, thank you.
Let me unmute. This is a selfish question for us here at LLN. Is there any way for us to drop that link that Sedona that you mentioned at the beginning about the food recommendations?
Oh,
it was
yeah.
on the screen, but it was not a hyperlink that we could click.
Yeah, let me grab that. You're going to have to give me a second to find it,
Okay.
but I will find it and then share it for the pit stop recommendations. And yes, they've been coming in. And of course, we want to know good about your food. I'll read.
Sedona, as people are mentioning here in the chat, thank you so much. It was fantastic.
And actually, Steve, while I look for that chat, will you read a couple of the comments that are more substantive than just thank you? There's a couple comments about names and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah, there was one that Virginia had above that I really kept on going back to. Let me go up there. Hold on one second here. I'll get it. It's getting close.
And the next slide is going to be that attendance QR code again. If you haven't filled that out, please do for our knowing that this was a successful lunch and learn, please.
So Virginia's comment was, when you were born from a Caucasian mother and a Spanish father, but raised white, I never knew what to call myself. What do I call myself now since I never lived in a cultural community? I thought that was a excellent, poignant, thought-provoking thought, Virginia.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I've
Andrea,
gone back and forth on a number of things to call myself over the years. And I'm still not sure I've settled on something.
Andrea mentioned that she had no idea Californios was a term. And so that was a learning there.
Thank you. Melissa, did you want to unmute yourself?
Sure, thank you. I just want to say that the kind of dissension, if you will, that Sedona described as occurring in conjunction with the consensus work kind of drives and really underpins the conversation and the feelings of, well, do I belong? Where do I belong? Or feeling as if I use one term, am I being unintentionally offensive when really I'm just trying to figure out what I should use for myself and where I fit. So I think it's a very powerful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Erminia had a really good thought in the chat here. There are 33 different countries with a lot of history. So we aren't all going to agree on one name. We can still stand in solidarity with each other as a community. Love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Could have had a much shorter lunch and learn with just that as the whole thing.
I'm going to do one last posting of the link for attendance. There at the height, there was 185 folks, but only 120 did register. I promise that unless you say you want to be subscribed, we won't spam you, but we do need to have information so that we can provide programs like today. So you're helping us out by saying that you were here today.
And Tina, you mentioned in the chat asking about a presentation. It will be on our LLN YouTube page. Noemi, I believe you said Monday or about there.
Yes, by Monday. And Vanessa just recently posted that webpage. It'll be there on Monday, if not before. And I remind all of you, there is one last Lunch and Learn happening next week. Any other comments or questions?
I'm definitely looking forward to hearing from the director of the Bailadores de Bronce next week. That is going to be quite an exciting presentation. But if there's nothing else anyone wants to share, maybe we give you back a couple minutes and call it early.
And Robert, after you log off, you can still do it. I'll leave the link on for a bit. And so you can always do the web form after you log off. And somebody wants the pit stop link again. Let me grab it again. There's way too many links. So I have a little Word document here of all my links. Okay.
Carrie asked the question, who is someone to talk to if you have questions? Carrie, what type of questions might you have?
A lot of my information I unfortunately just got from Google searches. I did not use any like paywalls or anything like that. So most of it you should be able to find depending on your keywords and if the algorithm of Google likes you that day. I definitely am not an expert in either of these fields. My field of expertise is like guardrails and things. So I'm just curious and love these conversations. So thank you all for your time listening.
And you could always email us at LLN www.ofmwa.gov. I'm putting that in the link, and just so you know, I answer those emails, and then I can, depending on the question, of course, I refer it to the right person. Thank you, everybody. If you need to log off, go ahead and log off. And again, we'll stay here if you have any other questions, but thank you so much, and we hope to see you next week.
Well done, Sedona.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording.